Okay.
Hi, everyone. We'll just be getting started in a few minutes here. You guys see my screen? I think we can get started as people trickle in. Todd, take it away.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by CHA, the Canadian Hydrogen Association, Simon Fraser University, and the Hydrogen Association of India. My name is Todd Romain. I'm the Executive Director for Hydrogen British Columbia at the Canadian Hydrogen Association, and I'll be your moderator today. For those of you who are not familiar with the CHA, we're a national industry association established in 2009 and a history that spans over 50 years. With regional affiliates in BC, Alberta, and Ontario, we support our members with advocacy, communications, networking, and government relations. We represent over 200 Canadian companies, academia, consultancies, research agencies, and end users who are developing, demonstrating, and deploying hydrogen technologies in Canada today. If you or your organization is not yet a member of the CHA and are interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to me after this webinar. So a few housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers today. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and held in accordance with CHA's competition law compliance policy. Please feel free to enter any questions that you may have in the chat section. We'll be sure to get them during the Q&A segment following the presentations, where you'll be able to turn on your mics and cameras as well. Our first speaker of the day is Dr. R.K. Malhotra, President of the Hydrogen Association of India. With a background in mechanical engineering, Dr. Malhotra has published, presented 190 research papers and holds 53 patents granted in India and abroad. He was bestowed with the Rudolph A. Aaron Award in 2012 by the International Association of Hydrogen Energy, and has also received the Global Excellence Award for his contributions in renewable energy sector, and also the IIT BHU Alumni Award for Excellence in R&D. Dr. Alicia Main is the W.J. Van Dusen Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship and Associate Vice President, Knowledge Mobilization and Innovation at Simon Fraser University. Her research interests are science innovation, science entrepreneurship, and the translation of inventions from university research labs. She founded the award-winning Invention to Innovation ITL program and the MITEX ITL Innovation Skills Training Program to develop entrepreneurial mindset and innovation skills in PhD scientists and engineers across Canada. Our next speaker is Laura Sloboda. She's leading the operationalization of SFU's Clean Hydrogen Hub, a new core research facility that brings together academia, government, community, and industry partners to advance the clean energy transition. The hub leverages SFU's leadership in clean hydrogen research and partnerships and demonstrates climate innovation in action. With an interdisciplinary background in chemical engineering and liberal arts, Laura spent 10 plus years in Canada's manufacturing sector in Ontario and BC. And finally, Dr. Stephen Holdcroft is a professor of chemistry and Canada's research chair at Simon Fraser University. He was former departmental chair and former president of the Canadian Society for Chemistry. He researches materials for electrochemical energy conversion, and storage. He's the author of more than 300 peer-reviewed articles and inventor of more than 15 patent families. With 3 former students, he co-founded Vancouver Iomir Innovations Incorporated, a thriving 50-plus person SFG spin-out commercializing materials for clean energy. Thanks for our speakers for attending this webinar today, and I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Malhotra.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me now? Good evening to my friends in Canada, and good morning to my friends and colleagues in India. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar hosted by the Canadian Hydrogen Association and Simon Fraser University in collaboration with our Hydrogen Association of India. On behalf of my association of the Indian Hydrogen Association, I welcome you all to this webinar. As you know, India is on a mission of green hydrogen. We have made it a national mission. Our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji had announced that we will be very, upfront on pushing this agenda, and the government is committed to produce 5 million tons of green hydrogen, 5 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030. That is the aim, minimum of that, although they are trying to increase this further. And the target for electrolyzer capacity to be built up in India is about 60 to 100 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity we want to create. And all this 5 million tons of green hydrogen will need about 125 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. So we are working towards augmenting our renewable energy capacity, creating electrolyzer manufacturing capabilities, and also green hydrogen production. So green hydrogen production will be primarily through the electrolyzers, using the renewable energy, which will be solar, wind, little bit from hydroelectric power, and rest will be some of this will also come from bio sources also in India. We feel that this will avert about 50 million tons of emissions, and we will have import savings of because India is a large importer of oil and natural gas, so we will save 12.5, nearly $13 billion in our imports of the oil and gas once we have this green hydrogen produced through renewable sources generated in India. And we are going to make an investment of $1 billion US. So this is a great opportunity, as you can see, that to produce hydrogen in India and also electrolyzer manufacturing capacity. So there are people from various countries who are providing the technology for electrolyzers, etc. And once we have this electrolyzers and green hydrogen produced, it is not only that we will have to transport it, we will have to store it. So there are many research projects also. The government is also supporting this through the various programs. Government is supporting through the SITE program, which is for the production of electrolyzers and green hydrogen subsidy, which is being given to cover some of the viability gap. To not a great extent, but to some extent, and we hope that with the the renewable electricity is continuously becoming cheaper and cheaper in India. Once the electrolyzer costs also come down with the scale of manufacturing, we hope that the green hydrogen production cost will come down. Now, in this, we are also going to create a lot of R&D projects have been planned. 48 million US dollars R&D projects are going to be approved. Some of them have been approved. Some are in the process of approval in next 1 month or two. They will also be approved. So a lot of R&D opportunities for collaboration with various global institutes also are there, where our research institutes, the Indian Institutes of Technology, the premier institutes, research institutes, even the public and private sector labs who are working on hydrogen, they have opportunities for collaboration with universities like SFU and global universities. We are collaborating, and we are creating some hubs for the emerging technologies, where about 48 million US dollars are being spent by the government. And further, then they will also have pilot projects of about 176 million US dollars for the projects in steel sectors, transport sector, shipping sector. because hydrogen is going to be an enabler for decarbonization of the various hard-to-abate sectors. So we will not only be using it for mobile mobility, but also for decarbonization of our, green hydrogen to be used in refineries, green hydrogen to be used in fertilizer sectors, green hydrogen in shipping, marine, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of opportunities. So I'm happy that you people from Canada are. I know there are a lot of fuel cell developments. I have personally visited some of the organizations in Canada, which are very, which have done some good work on the fuel cells and fuel cell test stations, etc. And I have also visited British Columbia University, Sam Fraser, SFU also in my previous visits, and I'm very happy I was very happy to learn that a lot of good work being done on green hydrogen. And so we look forward that we will possibly have some more collaborations with Indian partners from the Canadian. Hope things will become more, friendly in time to come, and then we can look forward to more collaboration and you know uh, more exchange of information. And this type of webinars are very important for exchange of information and learning from your side. So my people, my colleagues in India will be happy to learn more and more about what you are doing over there, how things are happening, and how things can be taken forward through the various collaborations. So once again, welcome you all to this webinar, and thanks to my friends in Canada who have proposed this, and we are happy to collaborate with you in taking this to, and we circulated, and so I hope many of our participants from India will gain through this interaction in this webinar. So thank you very much for hosting it and allowing me to speak for a few minutes. So over to Alicia. I have to, as I said, I have an urgent meeting where the Minister of Petroleum is also coming, and we had startup awards jury, which are going to be announced. So I have to, this has been scheduled a couple of days back only, so I will have to leave for some time. Okay, thank you very much. Hope you will excuse me for that purpose. Thank you.
Of course, and thank you, Dr. Malhotra. I hope that you'll get a chance to look at the recording afterwards, and a real pleasure. Thank you so much for co-hosting this with us, and also to the Hydrogen Association of India, to the Canadian Hydrogen Association for partnering with us at Simon Fraser University to deliver this webinar today. And thank you to Todd for your introductions and remarks. I'm Alicia Main. I'm the Associate Vice President of Knowledge Mobilization and Innovation at SFU, as well as a Professor of Innovation. To our audience, I just want to thank you very much for joining us. We bring you two very different presentations today, both about hydrogen innovation in Canada. In the first presentation, you will hear the results from research we have done over the past 3 years on the emergence of the clean hydrogen innovation ecosystem in Canada, with a focus on key leadership roles taken by both incumbent firms as well as new entrants. I've been losing my voice the past few days with the flu, as you may be able to hear, so my co-author, Anurag Wozniak, will be delivering the whole of that first presentation today. And Anurag is the lead author on this and has done the majority of the primary research and analysis, so you'll be in very good hands with him. And Anurag, I would ask you to introduce yourself at the beginning of the presentation. And thank you for stepping in. The second presentation will be about one very tangible initiative to de-risk breakthrough green hydrogen innovation and to strengthen the regional and national hydrogen ecosystem at the same time. This initiative is SFU's Clean Hydrogen Hub, and I'm delighted that we have both the Operations Director, Laura Sloboda, and the Scientific Director, Professor Stephen Holdcroft, here with us today to tell you more and to answer your questions. Simon Fraser University, or SFU, is Canada's leading comprehensive university. We have 3 campuses in the Greater Vancouver area in British Columbia, in the cities of Burnaby, Surrey, and Vancouver on Canada's beautiful west coast. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that the Coast Salish peoples, on whose unceded traditional territories our 3 campuses reside. Our vision is to be a leading research university advancing an inclusive and sustainable future. SFU is engaged locally, nationally, and internationally on global challenges, such as the clean energy transition. In the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SFU ranks third globally and first in Canada on both climate action and on sustainable cities and communities. We also rank first in Canada for innovation on the World University Rankings for Innovation. We greatly value our university's long-standing collaboration with our partners in India, and we are keen to both strengthen these and to build new partnerships in India. We are also proud to be an integral part of the strong and dynamic clean hydrogen ecosystem here in British Columbia and in Canada. Today, I'm so pleased that we have this opportunity to share with you our insights on the emergence of the clean hydrogen innovation ecosystem in Canada and to highlight our exciting initiative, developing a clean hydrogen hub at Simon Fraser University. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Todd. Back to you.
Great. Thanks, Alicia, for that introduction. So I just want, before we get started in the presentation, just a little background on Hydrogen BC for those that may not be aware of it. As mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the Canadian Hydrogen Association is a national nonprofit, and we have a provincial affiliate here in British Columbia, and I serve as the executive director. The next slide shows some of our board of directors, and you can see that we have a wide range of companies that are vocal and involved in our ongoing governance and advocacy and government relations here in BC, whether it be green hydrogen production, utilities, or fuel cell technologies. And so some of the companies here you can see is Caribou Low Fuels, Power Tech Labs, Econa Power, Ballard Fuel Power Systems, which is a very large company in Canada, Unilia Canada, Hydro Energy, Highfluence, H-Tech, and Fortis BC. Many of these companies are actually engaged in developing fuel station technology for hydrogen vehicles in North America. We have a large membership in BC. We have 80 plus member companies, large, small, private to publicly held, academic and local governments. And as I mentioned, a very diverse range of activities in BC, ranging from green hydrogen production, fuel cell technologies, dual fuel engines, and electrolysis and pyrolysis. 60% of all the hydrogen investment activities occur in British Columbia, and over 50% of the investments in hydrogen take place in BC as well. 50% of all companies in Canada are located in BC. So we have a very diverse and growing ecosystem here in British Columbia. And part of that is because we have a very supportive regulatory environment. We have the Clean BC strategy here in British Columbia, which its aim is to lower climate change emissions by 40% by 2030. And the BC government has a hydrogen strategy they rolled out several years ago, which is looking to accelerate production use of renewable and low carbon hydrogen use. And that's seen in several capacities. One is they support the hydrogen fuel station program, which I'll talk about in a little bit. They subsidize the hydrogen fleet rebate program for private companies. And they've expanded the mandate of the BC Oil and Gas Commission to include now hydrogen. Now we have it's called the regulator is called the BC Energy regulator, and they include hydrogen in their mandate as well. So in the last couple of years, we've seen a $900 million investment from the government, Project Gateway. Of that, $337 million is coming from the Canada Infrastructure Bank as a loan. And really, there's sort of three objectives to this. It's sort of three projects. One is up to 18 hydrogen fuel stations across British Columbia. To date, 7 have been built. There's going to be a facility in North Vancouver that will liquefy byproduct hydrogen. And there's 3 electrolysis hydrogen production plants to be constructed in Burnaby, Nanaimo, and Prince George up in the far north of Canada. We do, as I mentioned, have a very significant BC hydrogen fuel cell sector in the province. These are from 2021 stats, but just shows the relevance that close to $400 million in revenue annually. About 2,000 employees and high-paid employees are sort of employed in the Metro Vancouver area in the fuel cell technology and battery business, and 30 plus companies. And as a result, they've been able to have a huge impact globally, and they've been able to ship to 42 countries around the world. So a lot of the R&D of Canada is in Metro Vancouver in the fuel cell technology environment. And then, of course, we have hydrogen hubs in BC, which hubs should be unknown to most people. Hydrogen hubs are really energy flows where you have hydrogen production and you have end use. And so in British Columbia, we have a very significant hydrogen hub growing in Metro Vancouver, and a smaller one, but a very interested one growing in northern BC, which links, northeastern BC, which has liquid natural gas, and of course Alberta, to Prince George, which has more of an industrial hub for sort of hydrogen technologies, and then en route to Prince Rupert, where there's an export opportunity to send to East Asia. And then we also have a small hydrogen hub developing between the capital city of Victoria and Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. The other thing I wanted to mention is a really interesting report's coming out on British Columbia. It's going to be released in May of 2025. It's put together by the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. They're doing a hydrogen report, and the report really looks at cross-border linkages that would strengthen the Cascadia economies and infrastructure. So BC, Washington State, and it could expand to include Oregon, Alberta, Alaska. And it really focuses on the Pacific Northwest Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub. This was an initiative by the U.S. Department of Energy. Over $1 billion was provided in the last U.S. government administration to support infrastructure development for hydrogen in the Northwest. The report is jointly funded by BC and Washington State, and there'll be other neighboring provinces and state jurisdictions that will be involved in being part of that report in the coming months and years. That report is going to be released in May, and there'll be some findings from that report. We're actually doing a webinar on that on February the 24th for members interested in listening to the report's author, Penwar, and Deloitte talking about some of the recommendations and findings of that report before it's released in May. And finally, if there's any questions that you guys have on hydrogen or with the association or on the webinar, feel free to reach out to me at your convenience. My email is there, and I can be reached anytime. So I'll turn it now back to Anurag, and please feel free to go forward with the presentation from SFU.
Thank you, Todd, for the wonderful presentation and the gist about hydrogen developments in British Columbia. So I was glancing through the people who have joined today, and I'm very glad that the Consul General of India to Vancouver has also joined. Thankful to you, sir. And I've also seen that lots of startups from India in the hydrogen sector have joined. So thankful to all the startups. I've also seen incumbent players such as IOCL, HPCL present in the audience. I think the presentation that I'm going to give will be really relevant for all these startups and incumbents and how the interaction takes place. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and let me know once when the screen is visible. Can someone?
Yes,
mention?
That's great.
Perfect. Okay, so before I start the presentation, a quick two-liner introduction about me is that I'm a PhD student in innovation entrepreneurship at the Simon Fraser University. And before this, I was working as an innovation lead with Niti Aayog, the apex public policy think tank of Government of India, which is directly headed by the Prime Minister. Apart from that, I have done my MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and MSc in International Management from Bocconi University, Italy. And I have a total of about 7 years of work experience. So in today's presentation, I'll be talking about emergence and scale up of the Canadian green hydrogen innovation ecosystem. And especially we'll be dealing into how firm roles and their value chain dynamics help in the emergence of the innovation ecosystem. I'm joined by Professor Alicia Main, whom you heard just a minute ago. And I would like to thank all the co-authors at the onset of the presentation who are from Germany and University in Canada, of Fraser Valley in Canada. So this is the following agenda for today's presentation. And without further ado, let's jump directly into the context. And as we all know that due to climate change, there is a growing urgency to transition to sustainable energy sources. And because of this, there is globally great interest in green hydrogen technologies such as fuel cells and electrolyzers in order to complete the net zero goals by 2050. You know that hydrogen as an energy carrier will play an important role in decarbonization, and that its usage will be shifting to different sectors such as transport, industry, and so on. To give you an example, in 2023, Canada had their first hydrogen train trials. Similarly, last year, India announced the first hydrogen-powered train that will be soon going for trials into 2025. We also know that 50 plus countries have published their national green hydrogen strategies and are attempting to build and scale the green hydrogen innovation ecosystems, and that countries are pouring billions of dollars. For example, US spending about $7 billion for building their hydrogen hubs, Canada and Germany putting about 600 million. And just last year, India announced a $21 billion green hydrogen hub to be built in Vizag. Thus, it becomes imperative to understand the emergence and scale up of clean energy innovation ecosystem. So in order to understand and learn about innovation ecosystem, let's look at the literature, what it tells us. And it tells that the emerging technologies require support, supportive innovation ecosystems to survive and thrive, and that scale up challenges can be reduced by an alignment structure of the actors that are present in the ecosystem. And when I say about alignment structure, it basically means the mutual agreement among the actors regarding their positions and role. The literature also tells that there are main two phases of ecosystem emergence followed by expansion, and the emergence phase is subdivided into preparation, formation, and operation. And for the genesis, growth, and legitimacy of innovation ecosystem, these actors need to take different roles and make strategic choices to position themselves in the ecosystem. Now that we have talked about different roles, let's try to see what the literature says about the different roles that are present during ecosystem emergence. We get to know that there are four kinds of role. One is leadership roles, value creation roles, value support roles, and entrepreneurial ecosystem roles. Of these four, our research focuses on the first two because they are directly linked to value creation. And as you can see in leadership roles, there are two roles. One is of ecosystem leader, performing four activities, and the second is of dominator. Next, what we don't understand about the emergence of innovation ecosystem is that how do these roles emerge and who among the actors take up this role? Are they startups? Are they incumbents or MNC energy firms? And most importantly, what is the interaction between the leadership, direct value creation roles, and value chain positioning of the actors? And next, how do ecosystem leaders act differently and what different strategies do they use? So in order to answer this, in order to further dwell into this, we came forward with the research question of how do actors' positioning and their roles influence the emergence and scale up of innovation ecosystems. And in the slides to follow, I'll be telling you about how we were able to create a unique data set from scratch and carried out a single case study by identifying different set of actors and how we were able to operationalize the various leadership and value creation roles. And lastly, the interaction between the complementary innovation ecosystems. So in terms of the methodology, it is comprised of four buckets, and I'll be talking about each in detail. So in order to know which are the active players in the ecosystem, we used a search query in the Derwent Innovation Database, which was followed by pitch book analysis and expert consultations. So we found that there are 78 for-profit actors in the Canadian green hydrogen innovation ecosystem. Now then, we classified these actors into de novo actors, which are startups, DLU actors, which are incumbent firms, or MNC energy firms, and we categorize them further into energy, automobile, and other sectors. Next, we tried to see what are the different value chain steps taken by these different actors as the ecosystem evolved. Then we utilized the Canadian hydrogen and fuel cell sector publications from 2004 to 2024. Especially, there is a section in their publications called the technology focus. So we were able to see how the technology focus evolved during the ecosystem emergence. Next, we were able to operationalize, as I was talking earlier about the ecosystem leader. So there are four activities. Just to give you an example, for example, value management activity, the description is there in the literature, but we were able to operationalize it by saying, for example, running a world scale clean hydrogen project. And the example of that is Air Liquide Canada completed the construction of world's largest PEM electrolyzer. So this is how what was available in the literature, we were able to operationalize those statements and find relevant examples in the ecosystem. Next, in terms of the direct value creation rules, there were 4 value creation rules. And again, to give you an example of a supplier. So during the 2010 Winter Olympics that were held in Vancouver, Canada, Air Liquide was the supplier who was able to supply the only green hydrogen available at that time, and it had to be trucked from Quebec. So, and lastly, in terms of the methodology, we will look into the analysis that comes with this research. So first of all, let's see how do the actors' value chain position and roles influence the emergence and scale up of innovation ecosystem. So we were able to find that the Canadian green hydrogen innovation ecosystem emerged long before the relevant regulatory policies were established. And you can see the different phases of the innovation ecosystem. And currently, the ecosystem is in expansion phase. You can also see an interesting factor that the incumbent firms are higher in the earlier phases, but as the ecosystem evolves, there are more number of startups or de novo firms. A major event that happened was of Winter Olympics 2010, which served as an exogenous trigger by bringing in together a core group of 4 for-profit actors. This led to enhanced inter-firm interaction as well as inter-provincial interaction. For example, Ballard and HTEC were in British Columbia, Air Liquide was in Quebec, and New Flyer was in Winnipeg. Next, in terms of the leadership roles, we find that there was no ecosystem leader or dominator present in the early emergence stages, which gives an indication that in the earlier phases, there was distributed leadership, and later on, it organically transitioned to centralized leadership. In the expansion phase, we find that this ecosystem has 2 ecosystem leaders and 1 dominator. Similarly, from the direct value creation role analysis, we find that in the expansion phase, the startups are able to cater to more number of value creation roles, which also shows that the ecosystem is starting to develop trust, recognition, and accepting their influential role in shaping the ecosystem architecture. Next, in terms of the firms' focus on value chain, we find that more number of firms were focused on storage, transport, and emergent phase, but in the expansion phase, their focus shifted to green hydrogen production. This also gives a brief insight about how the advancement in storage, transport, and usage technologies were pivotal in driving firm towards green hydrogen production. And we also observe that there is heavy dependence on DLU's hydropower, followed by wind power, and that there are no critical mineral suppliers that exist in the Canadian green hydrogen innovation ecosystem, suggesting that there is heavy dependence on foreign nations for critical minerals. So this is the overall structure of the ecosystem and the story about their evolution. But let's look into who are these ecosystem leaders and how different pathways were taken by them so that they could become ecosystem leaders. So in our research, we found that there were 2 ecosystem leaders. The purple circle that you see is MNC energy firm, Air Liquide, and the triangle that you see is a startup or a de novo firm, HTEC. We were able to find that the leadership roles emerged after direct value creation roles were covered, which means that the actors need to gain architectural knowledge about the ecosystem before they enter leadership roles, and that the ecosystem leaders were covering high-risk value chain steps, and they were also present in the midstream and downstream value chain steps. Lastly, I would like to show you a small example of how these leaders were able to traverse through different value chain steps. So if you see, the incumbent firm air liquid was present in storage and transport value chain step, whereas the de novo or HTech firm was present in component manufacture, specializing in fuel delivery. So these are the starting positions in the value chain, and they are different. Then the MNC Energy was able to move upstream by acquiring a minority stake in another startup firm called Hydrogenics. Whereas we see that HTech, which is the startup firm, engaged in inter-firm cooperation, motivated by complementary assets to bring forward integration. This shows that both the ecosystem leaders were able to evolve with the evolving ecosystem architecture, and they were able to take various value chain steps, especially the high risk one. Now, if you want to take three main points, I think my presentation has stopped. But as I was telling, if you want to take three main points from today's presentation, I would say that ecosystem leaders take high risk value chain steps, and they evolve with the evolving ecosystem architecture. The second point would be exogenous shocks bring ecosystem players together and increase the interaction between firms as well as provinces. And lastly, that complementarity between the various components of innovation ecosystem leads to enhanced interaction between firms of the ecosystem. So with that, I would like to close my presentation and hand back to Todd. And if you have any questions, please put them in chat. We'll cater to them towards the end. Thank you so much once again.
Great. Thanks for your presentation, Anurag. Very informative. Okay, great. Now we're going to turn over to Dr. Stephen Holdcroft to present. Stephen?
Good morning to you folks in India. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar and to share some vision about clean hydrogen. As many of you know, there are different types of electrolyzers for green hydrogen, but it's also increasing evidence that if we want to move to a technology that is cost competitive with making hydrogen from fossil fuels in the gigawatt and terawatt scale, then we might have to move to alkaline membrane water electrolysis technology. And of course, this has been problematic because there have been no alkaline membranes that have been stable for sufficient time. So at SFU, we've been really happy to be part of a project that's been going on for over a decade to develop new membranes that are robust and stable and now commercialized that put alkaline membrane water electrolysis technology at the cusp of large-scale commercialization. And so as part of that initiative, SFU is developing a clean hydrogen innovation program. And here I'm going to turn it over to Laura Sloboda, who has been the operations director for rolling out and really the leader of what you're about to see in our hydrogen innovation ecosystem. So Laura.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Anurag, for the great presentation earlier. I think Alicia's comment at the beginning of the presentation was very accurate, that these are very different sets of information. So what I seek to show you with the next set of slides is this more tangible example of something that we're working on to accelerate clean hydrogen innovation and technology broadly in Canada, but based here in BC, that really started with the innovation that Steve described in anion exchange membranes and has expanded from there. So without any further ado, I will share my screen. So you saw a bit of this earlier. This, I think, just sets the scene a bit for when we started developing this clean hydrogen hub for de-risking hydrogen innovations in Canada. This was the climate, so there was a lot of interest, especially that began after the BC Hydrogen Strategy was published around 2020. From there, you'll see some familiarities here as well from the value chain slides that Anurag was describing. This really just touches on some of the expertise that SFU brings to the field. So this innovation in low-cost durable membranes for green hydrogen, which Steve was the driving force of, and the spin-out in company Ionomer Innovations, which now produces this component. This was a big reason why we started this project. That coupled with SFU's core strengths in the innovation ecosystem, so modeling systems interactions and climate innovation policy. We also saw in the last presentation how the technology tends to come first, and I think most people would find this quite relatable as well, that the technology is usually ready before the people are ready to accept it or to use it. So we always need to not forget about the human side of these technologies. Speaking of the human side, here are a few of the faces at SFU in terms of hydrogen expertise. You just briefly met Dr. Stephen Holdcroft, who's the Canadian Research Chair in Electrochemical Materials, as well as the Scientific Director of the Clean Hydrogen Hub. Dr. Eric Cheng has been deeply involved in companies such as Ballard on the fuel cell technology side of things. Dr. Sammy Khan and Dr. Gordon McTaggart-Cohen are assistant professors that are part of the Sustainable Energy Engineering School, which is a relatively new program that SFU offers out of the Surrey campus, which combines the traditional engineering disciplines, chemical, mechanical, electrical, into a more multidisciplinary program to help address the challenges that we see in clean energy in the world today. And highlighted on the right is a feature about Ionomer Innovations, and they've been in the Global Clean Tech 100 a few times now, and so this is really has a high potential for producing cheap clean hydrogen through this breakthrough. How we tend to support that endeavor and others like it in the hydrogen innovation ecosystem is twofold. So one, through helping to de-risk these technology advancements to improve clean hydrogen production economics. And so one thing that we found in the earlier stages of developing this project was that when we spoke to some of these smaller players in the value chain, I'll often use the analogy of a car, where these component providers are making the brake pad, the steering wheel, the seatbelt, and they can't afford to buy a car just to test a seatbelt. And so what we sought to do with the Clean Hydrogen Hub was to utilize a shared infrastructure model that had been successful before at universities and research institutes, of investing in this more expensive infrastructure and then allowing it to be used by various players in research or industry to test smaller components on sort of a user fees model. So it's the coupling of this type of model with hydrogen, and in this case, a hydrogen hub, which is, as Todd mentioned at the beginning, it's really about co-locating supply and demand of hydrogen together. And so bringing the base infrastructure for that into a place where it can be used safely and accessibly by users looking to advance hydrogen innovation. And the other half of that is connecting these people in the first place. I think one of the interesting findings as we progressed throughout the project was that there's a lot of there's a lot of players, especially in British Columbia, of course, in the hydrogen space, who are doing projects internationally. Most of the startups that we talk to, 95% of their revenues come from export. So they're mostly doing business outside of Canada. And so we would be talking to their clients outside of Canada and not realizing that these guys are actually all beside each other here in Canada, but working with these internationals. And so having more opportunities for these stakeholders to collide and to deploy local and domestically produced technology is another key aim. I'll speak briefly to the overall project that we're doing. So I've alluded to it a few times, this Clean Hydrogen Hub. It's currently in design, so we are refining that. With an ambitious project like this, I think that you certainly run into different sorts of challenges in creating a site like this. And if there's specific questions there, I'm happy to go into it, but I can speak to the general process that we've covered. So in order to bring together production and demand, there's different requirements for a site. So there are many different permitting requirements, code. This sort of dictates a lot of aspects of the layout. In developing the plan for this site, we also had a number of interesting boundary conditions. So those of you who are based in India or joining from elsewhere, I should preface that the Burnaby campus of Simon Fraser University, which is where this project is being built, is actually on top of a mountain. So there's a boundary condition in the south side of the site that we're developing that has about a 30-degree slope. One of the other sides, in this case, is a park. Another is a pathway, an accessible path, and a district energy network facility, a biomass facility, effectively. And then the other side is a road. And I think one of the interesting findings progressing through the design of this project is that these types of sites, these hydrogen infrastructure sites, are more typically done in large industrial type spaces. And so what you see in this rendering is it's a bit of miniature version, I would say, of an industrial type of site. And trying to urbanize infrastructure like this is quite it's quite an interesting challenge because there's just interfaces with the public that are necessary for interaction with students, researchers, industry, government, policymakers, et cetera, that are not as typically present, I think, in larger versions of hydrogen hubs, such as what you might see in Edmonton or what's been under development in Prince George that you saw a little bit of earlier in Todd's presentation. So a lot of the expertise for developing this type of infrastructure is coming from the oil and gas networks and especially natural gas expertise. And this has been sort of transitioned into supporting the build out of hydrogen projects. And so we see a lot of influence of this industrial sector and then trying to sort of sit within an academic or urbanized environment in order to facilitate the creation of a project like this. So I'll leave it at that in terms of the design process. And maybe just highlight a few of the key elements that are present. And so if you think about this hub as having different zones, you could say that there's a production zone, and part of the production zone focuses on deploying a first of its kind, large scale AM electrolyzer, utilizing the ionomer membranes that were referenced earlier. So this development will result in large area stacks and an electrolyzer to test those and collect detailed data for analysis, modeling, other various research purposes. This type of equipment currently doesn't exist in Canada, and to our knowledge, not yet in the world either. So this is a big challenge, I would say, to really develop this at this scale. And I won't go into too much of why we are focused on AEM versus some of the other incumbent water splitting technologies. But if you do have questions about that, please do drop them in the chat. So that's sort of the focus of the production area. That's supported by water purification. So the water management systems are another area of study and innovation in this project, as well as the electrical systems and the power management, grid management, interconnection of renewables. All of that is also very important. Then we get into the midstream value chain, which we've heard a little bit about Air Liquide earlier, right? And in terms of that midstream piece of storing and transporting hydrogen, I think this sometimes gets overlooked in these development projects. There tends to be a lot of focus on production and then on use, and then sometimes how the hydrogen gets from point A to point B actually needs can end up being a bit tricky. And so we wanted to make sure that we dedicated space to being able to trial different technologies that support this, including higher pressure compression, which is typically what's being used for the mobility applications. So fueling at either 500 or 950 bar. Newer technologies for this, including ionic liquid pumps. There's also a lot of interest, of course, in liquefied hydrogen and cryogenic. This is a bit a little bit tricky to fit into the site just because of different requirements around cryogenics. But also a very interesting method nonetheless. And then solid state and even storage as LOHCs has been emerging as well. And so being able to facilitate the testing of these technologies at pilot scale is really what we're seeking to do with this project. And by pilot scale, I sometimes refer to these as sort of teenage technologies. So they're out of the lab, but not quite ready for industry. And so they need this support at this intermediate stage, usually sort of in the TRL 5 to 8 range, and to be able to pilot things at a mid scale. So this site is it's about 1 megawatt of hydrogen production, but the overall site is rated for 2 megawatts. And then lastly, on the offtake side, we have some different optionality built in for offtake possibilities. So transportation, of course, has been the main focus of that in BC. And from Todd's earlier presentation, you might recall the first news item around H-Tech and their fueling stations. So they're really driving towards building out hydrogen mobility, especially through Class 8 trucks. Large demonstrations happening in Prince George, and these growing fueling stations in the west of Canada to accommodate this. And I think we'll hear more from the Penware seminar upcoming in the next few months about this trajectory. I think a lot of this will tend to move down to California as a market to start with, based on what we've seen so far. So transportation is a big one. Another one is around diesel substitution. So this has been an interesting topic for us to explore in terms of substituting sort of stationary generators. So diesel gensets, which are still the de facto backup power that we're using most, if not all, of Canada. And so being able to substitute hydrogen for that, whether it's through a fuel cell or through these sort of co-combustion technologies like diesel tech or hydra energy that combine hydrogen with diesel in just sort of a retrofitted product to reduce carbon emissions this way. So this is quite an interesting one for us here in the Vancouver and BC area because of just the number of these gensets that are around, the ability to translate this to remote communities running off of diesel generators, and just the beyond the environmental impacts, the health impacts, noise, the energy security factors there. And there's large industries here who can benefit from this as well, such as the film industry uses a lot of diesel generators, and they're quite prolific here. So I'll leave it at that in terms of some of the examples. I think I saw a number of things come up in the chat, but I know we're saving questions to the end. So with that, I'm just going to finish off with a bit of a summary of some of the different stakeholders across the value chain that have been or are involved in this particular consortium-based project. And so I want to acknowledge the funders through the Pacific Economic Development Agency, PacificCan, BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. If I'm not mistaken, I think I saw one of the folks from there on this call. The city of Burnaby, so the municipality in which we're developing this. So we're backed with all three levels of government, and then Fortis BC as well, who's the natural gas utility here, and the Innovative Clean Energy Fund. Aside from that, there's a number of different companies involved in different ways, and we hope to be involved with more soon in the near future. And so I will leave it at that and pass it back to Todd, I believe.
That's great. Thanks, Lauren, Stephen, Alicia, for that presentation. We are going to go into some questions and answers now. So if you are going to ask a question, we ask you to put on your camera and put on your mic as well. But there's a few questions in the chat we'll go through first. So maybe I can ask Anurag, I'll ask you the first question. The question is from Pete from Jacobs, Canada. Given the challenges faced by the 2010 Olympic Hydrogen Bus Project, what key advancements or policies are needed today to make hydrogen a viable long-term solution for public transit?
Yeah, thank you, Pete, for that question. And thank you all the 50 odd participants that are there for the active participation. So Pete, for the 2010 Olympics, we know that 20 hydrogen buses were there, and the project ran for four and a half years. The main problem that was there, that the hydrogen was shipped from Quebec to British Columbia. And so the first main thing that needs to be done is build robust refueling infrastructure. And we see that HTEC and other actors have taken up that task. They are expanding the network of hydrogen refueling stations. Second is we need to, especially the government needs to create long-term demand signals. They need to be more bold and set ambitious targets. For example, 100% zero emission public transit by 2040. Such goals should be tied up to hydrogen and electric solutions. And the government could also step in to foster further collaborations between the incumbents as well as the startups by setting in the ground rules for operations and standardization of various things.
Great, thank you, Anurag. Okay, next question. This is for you, Laura. At SFU Hydrogen Hub, are there opportunities or facilities for testing of other AEMS from external outside SFU Canadian users?
Sure. So yes, there are facilities for we're testing I assume you're talking about stacks. These are these are currently in development, right? So depending what size you're looking at, and exactly what components you're looking at. This is actually part of what we're trying to bring forward with this project. So I should have caveated when it's finished, there will be opportunities for this, and at different scales as well as what we're trying to achieve. So that will be possible once the site is built, and we're targeting early 2027 for having it online. So that's can reach out with more information if you're interested.
That's great. And next question would be, I guess, another one for SFU. What's the maximum current density achieved across the electrolyzer cell installed at SFU?
Yeah, maybe I could have a go at that. As Laura just mentioned, these are projects that are ongoing, but in a typical anion exchange membrane water electrolyzer, we're looking at aiming towards 2 amp centimeter squared in that ballpark. That, of course, is about 3 times what you would have in a traditional alkaline water electrolysis, and typical of what you might find in a PEM water electrolysis. So upwards of 2 amps per centimeter squared.
That's great. I guess another question for you, Laura. I think you've answered it, but I'll ask you again, and it came up in the questions here. Have you identified potential buyers for your produced hydrogen?
Yeah, we have a number of ongoing offtake conversations. I think the challenges with offtake that most folks will tell you is it's hard to get those signed until you have your production up and running or virtually up and running. But broadly, they fall into some of the sectors I mentioned earlier. So mobility, fueling of, for example, a bus. So this was one of the opportunities identified by the local transit utility here, is that it's difficult to electrify buses that need to go up a mountain because the base infrastructure for that is very expensive. Also here in Canada in the winter, there's challenges with fully electrifying some of the transportation because of heating requirements. So it's actually nice when things produce heat. And if you had to fully use electric resistive heating, you could lose up to 40% of your range in the winter, which is not really great. So some of these hybrid solutions or hydrogen buses have particular applications. So we're pursuing that as a lead. The diesel gensets that I mentioned. So for example, we're looking at a living lab, which is sort of when we deploy pilot technologies using municipal or campus infrastructure to help support some of the backup power needs for expanding the data center. So as we see growth of data centers, we also need growth of non-grid energy backup systems. So those are a few of the conversations we've had around offtake.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, another question from Alec Joshi. This is for you, Anurag. What is the most impactful use of green hydrogen? Oil and gas, steel refinery, fertilizer industry seems to benefit more than transportation from value proposition perspective. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as the days are unfolding, we are able to see that the areas which are hard to abate are the most prominent ones, and they are in future going to be where green hydrogen or in general hydrogen technologies are being applied. We see that public transport is also one of the biggest sectors, but private transport like cars and vehicles, as of now, the electric sector is dominating. But going forward, steel refining, public transports are some of the biggest sectors that are going to benefit from the expansion of green hydrogen.
Great, thank you. The next question is either, I guess, for Stephen or Laura. It's from Gangadit Kapila. Can we know the purpose of pressure reduction station and hydrogen refueling station? How can we avoid PRS? You guys have any comments on that?
I don't have any particular comments on that. No, that's a bit too specific for.
Okay.
That's
Yeah, likewise.
presumably for needing a particular pressure for a particular application, and some applications will need low pressure, and some of them need high pressure. So there are technologies coming out of electrolyzers where we're hoping to pressurize the hydrogen as it's formed, and so that relieves some of the extra ancillary equipment for additional pressures. But it depends on the application. If some applications require low pressure, and I forget the ones which do, but they're mainly chemical, then they can be made on site at low pressure. But if you're looking for high pressure for transportation, then of course you need some pressurized system to get up to the levels. So it really depends on what the application is. That's my understanding of that.
That's great. And Laura, another question for you. What is the estimated dollar per kilogram rate predicted SFU project at its full capacity?
So we originally projected around, I think, $6 to $7 a kilogram. And of course, this fluctuates with electricity prices, particularly, which is the main driver of that. And then that's for production only, right? So then based on whether you need to move that hydrogen or do anything with it offsite, you need to bring that in as well. But those are our projections at the offset.
Yeah, if I could just, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
So if I could
Please.
just add, yes. So this it is demonstration on relatively on an electrolyzer that has cheap components and non-porous, and so that while that might start out at quite a high dollars per kilogram, the idea is this would be a template for larger electrolyzer stacks, and then as the scales go up, the cost would go down. So there's a lot of analysis that shows that AEM water electrolysis can really get down to the $1 per kilogram if we're using renewable energy. So ultimately, that's what we're aiming for in the long-term goal. But of course, this is just 1 megawatt, so that's just a drop in the ocean on this scale.
You've got us all excited on this topic. I also wanted to add that one of the de-risking goals of this initiative is to try to de-risk some of the processes that can be scaled, as Professor Holcroft was mentioning, but to de-risk those in such a way that it's much easier to make the transition, utilizing this novel membrane, and that has. It's totally sustainable material. It doesn't have any forever chemicals in it, and it also doesn't have to include a number of precious metals that are needed by the alternatives.
That's great. Thanks, Alicia. Okay, Anurag, another question for you. And I think I spoke about this in my presentation a little bit about Clean BC, and we have the project H2 Gateway. We also have the low carbon fuel standard. But I guess from your standpoint, from a transportation perspective, what government policies are in place to support H2 distribution network to make use of its value proposition?
Yeah, so in terms of the government support that it's providing to startups, I think from what I've observed, the government is doing pretty well over here, but there are still further chances of improvement. So when I was trying to compare it with different parts of the world, there were some government initiatives such as usage of hydrogen vehicles for government offices. I think it's a very easy pick, which the government can easily do, especially here in British Columbia. Some of the other incentives that can be, further enhances to see which are the like-minded states or provinces, and not only in Canada, because earlier, if we see, even the state of Washington and California had a hydrogen highway. So we could also look at if these transportation routes can be further enhanced, and not only national, but international players could be incorporated to further strengthen the ecosystems and the actors that are trying to pioneer this.
Great. Another question for you, Anurag. In your presentation, you mentioned dominator. So one of the questions is, what is a dominator? you could clarify that.
Yeah. So basically, we were trying to operationalize the statements that were there in the literature. And in our context, dominator means a firm which has acquired 3 or more green hydrogen related firms. And in our case, only Air Liquide was a firm which was able to acquire 3 or more green hydrogen related firms. And hence it became a dominator towards the expansion phase.
That's great. Okay, I guess a question to Laura, Stephen, or Alicia, if you want to weigh in on this. I think we've answered some of it, but I'll ask the question here. What do you think are the biggest challenges in green hydrogen production research at this scale in Canada?
We probably might give 3 different answers. So I could give a version of an answer to that. And I'll focus on I think the infrastructure that supports that research is a challenge, right? And I think someone highlighted that, and it came up in Anurag's mention of when the Olympics were hosted, and just the infrastructure background that needs to be in place to facilitate some of this work is challenging, and also because the policies are not always in place when you need them to kind of proceed with scaling up that work. So I think that's something that, for example, we're also experiencing as we go through the development of this, is that the legislation for it was relatively recently moved into the Oil and Gas Commission's jurisdiction here. And as that's happened, and this legislation rather, is evolving as we go through the development, and there's ways where it's sometimes different or the same than the municipal permit requirements. I think trying to get a line of sight on these and trying to harmonize them where possible, and trying to make sure that we build this kind of infrastructure both safely and cost effectively, and trying to do it as quickly as possible to help facilitate all of this research that's really just waiting for space and correctly permitted zones to be able to do this work is one of the challenges. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Stephen or Alicia, are you satisfied with that, or do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say for those Indian colleagues, if they don't know, that Canada is very rich in oil and gas, and the immediate biggest impact in the hydrogen sector and lowering carbon emissions would appear to be storage and sequestration, the blue hydrogen, and so that gets a lot of activity and a lot of research dollars in Canada, and after that, whatever's left goes to electrolysis, which is relatively small, and of that, the anion exchange membrane process, which is the only one that can really challenge the fossil fuel derived hydrogen, that gets even less of a look, because it's a technology that's really only come on stream in the last 10 years, and it's had some recent advances. So we're up against some big players in the blue hydrogen, and that's why we're doing this at the university level with those interesting parties that see a future in it, and that's the way we're moving towards. So that's why it's been pretty difficult. Yeah. That's my opinion.
Great. Okay. We have a few more questions, and then we'll go to the audience. So this one is for Anurag. How is the venture capital landscape in Canada responding to green hydrogen startups? Are investors optimistic about long-term returns?
Sure. So though our research didn't directly focus on the venture capitalists, because we were focusing on the for-profit actors that were part of the value chain, but I see a very, in terms of the investment sentiment, there is, like a sine curve, where there are phases where the investment sentiment for hydrogen-related firms goes up, and then there are phases where the investment sentiment goes down. It's also interesting to see that the lead player within this ecosystem, which is Ballard, which in ways was one of the pioneers for this ecosystem to get kick-started. It remains a question that it still remains not profitable. So, being in this sector, trying to, trying to be at the forefront and create a market on its own is also challenging sometimes. But we have seen that the investors, when they see the right opportunity, they have stepped in, and many of the de-risking that has taken place is not only via the public grants, but via the venture capitalist funds.
That's great. We have another question for you, Anurag. So here it is here. What were the primary challenges faced by the Canadian green hydrogen ecosystem during its emergence and scale-up phases, and how were they addressed?
Sure. So some of the primary challenges that we saw in the presentation also was that no single actor assumed the role of an ecosystem leader. When studying about innovation ecosystems, we often see that a lead actor, takes control and is the orchestrator of the ecosystem. But here we saw that there was diffused leadership. And then in the later phases, those ecosystems leaders such as Air Liquide and HTech started to come up. So the first one, I would say that definitely that there were leadership and coordination gaps. Secondly, I would say infrastructure, the hydrogen, the Olympic hydrogen project would have been a great success if the right set of infrastructure was available. But as we know, things take time, and the only hydrogen that was available during that time was being transported from a different province. Had right now, like, the hydrogen is being produced in British Columbia, and we see that there are several attempts for demand creation and scaling infrastructure. And lastly, I would say that so we know that policy follows technologies, and I would say that the policy and regulatory support is come up and is there, but still the high cost and market uncertainty that exists for the hydrogen sector overall, presents a significant barrier. So uh, we'll have to wait and watch how it goes.
Great. Okay, and we have a few more questions here. This one's for Stephen and Laura. It's a question and a comment and a question. Did I hear an estimated cost is $1 a kilogram? Achieving $1 a kilogram hydrogen is a significant breakthrough, but without parallel investments in infrastructure and end-use adoption, there's a risk of limited real-world impact. What concrete steps are being taken to ensure this low-cost hydrogen translates into large-scale industrial adoption?
Feel comfortable with that, Laura?
You can go if you want,
or I can go as well. It's a good question, and there's a question related to it below as well about the AEM electrolyzers and what advances. And so first and foremost, in order to reach this $1 a kilowatt, we have to have major advances in aspects of AEM water electrolysis. That's the membranes, that's the catalyst layers, that's the scale up, because we're talking, if we're moving into the megawatt and the gigawatt, then those are large quantities of material. And so the value chain and the building up to that scale needs to be absolutely setting motion. But it's more than that. As Anurag has said, there has to be policy and regulation. If there's no appetite for that, if it's an impediment, then it will slow down the rolling out of this. It won't stop it. It'll just move it sideways. And so a lot depends on the policy and the local and the politics going on around the world. But certainly, how would you de-risk this? Well, we de-risk it by demonstrating, like what we're trying to do at Simon Fraser University, because if we can, when we demonstrate at 1 megawatt, it will be clear that this is a technology worth investing in. because there simply are no demonstrations of electrolyzers at this scale using this technology. So first and foremost, we have to show and demonstrate, and then that will trigger the enthusiasm of investors. And even then, they have to decide on the timeline, the time frame. But I'm pretty confident the way things are moving, again, not just in the green electrolysis, but also in green hydrogen, but in blue hydrogen as well, because it's the blue hydrogen that's going to lay out a lot of the infrastructure and have us comfortable with using hydrogen. So there are several aspects to this. One is we need a rapid rollout of hydrogen use and to be comfortable with it and the policies and regulations. And at the same time, we have to be developing this technology. And so there's a few prongs to that, rolling out the green hydrogen over the next 5 or 10 years, for sure.
That's great. So we have one last written question. Sorry, Stephen.
So I want to know if Alicia or Laura wanted to add anything to that, or Anurag, or...
Oh, I would maybe just add, oh, go ahead, Alicia.
I was just going to say, I thought you did a great job, but Laura, go ahead.
It was a great job. I was going to add, I think this is why the hub model has been the favorite model of hydrogen hubs in general. I mean, the ones we heard about earlier in the US and the ones that have formed in Canada and elsewhere, trying to bring these different partners together that do also focus on end use, because it's not typically the same player that's doing all the production and the transportation and the use. It's these different players. So having a model, whether it's a hub or a consortium or whatever, to bring together the different players and sort of having that constant communication as things change. I think those are also just other factors in facilitating that translation.
Just building briefly on that, you saw a lot of the value chain analysis in both of the SFU presentations. And part of the reason for that is that sometimes the big breakthrough invention happens very far upstage in the value chain. In this case, in a totally novel polymer that allows for the potential for very low cost green hydrogen production. And so because the invention happens there, you still need to de-risk all the steps of the value chain. And that's what this initiative allows.
That's great. Okay, last question. Anyone can answer this one, or anyone who wants to choose to answer it. What are the major challenges in scaling up AEM water electrolysers for green hydrogen? Using advancements in AEM WE technology, do you see a promising future in the next 5 to 10 years for it to become a major breakthrough? Any comments?
I think that was answered pretty much in the last round. Yes, there will be even more developments in electrocatalysis. There are continuing developments in the membranes, and then how do we put them all together to roll out at scale membrane electrode assemblies on the square kilometer scale that is needed, and how do you then deal with quality control and reproducibility? And so that technology is moving very quickly from lab scale to pre-production, and then once demonstrated, it will be moving into production, I think, over the next 5 or 10 years. So these are challenges, but as I say, at the same time, the whole hydrogen infrastructure has to be moving along and not just waiting for this new cheaper technology. It needs to be rolling out, whether it's injection into pipelines or for remote applications. And so this technology will just seamlessly move in and add to all the other hydrogen technologies. And eventually, hopefully, it will become dominant in the next, before 2050.
That's great. Okay, was there any questions from people attending online? If you have any questions, can you raise your hand now and make sure to put on your camera and keep your microphone on? Looks like there is none. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for, go ahead, anyway.
So, Todd, before you bring the session to the
Yeah.
close, I just want to again thanks all the participants, especially I see the Consul General and Trade Attaché still present in the presentation. So thank you so much for them. And I also see that leading technology commercialization incubators from India have joined, Soma Chattopadhyay from Venture Center and colleagues from HTPC, IOCL, BPCL. Thank you so much for staying throughout the entire presentation. Just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Great. Yes, well, on behalf of the Canadian Hydrogen Association, we want to thank Elisa Main, Dr. Malhotra, Stephen Holcroft, Anu Wagdasnik, and Laura Sloboda for presenting today. And I hope everyone learned a lot. And if there's any questions you have to the speakers or to the CHA, feel free to reach out to us by email at your convenience. But thanks again for everyone attending today, and have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night or good morning.
Right.